FullStack, what we do is a fully volumetric modular system where we finish as much as we can in the factory, including putting on the facade, doing all the finishes, putting in the accessories, doing all the mechanical and electrical distribution. So we're really trying to eliminate the majority of the work on site.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I'm with Roger Krulak, president and founder of FullStack Modular. Thank you so much for coming on today, Roger.
Oh, Ari, thank you so much for inviting me.
Listen, my pleasure. It's a Made in America podcast, Roger. So we always start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
So we manufacture multifamily buildings in a volumetric modular fashion using steel and cementitious board as the infrastructure mostly.
And why do you do it?
So the construction industry has been suffering from lack of productivity, lack of entry into the trades, cost increases, lack of available housing for decades, if not centuries, and so we need a better solution. And I think that incorporating industrialized construction into the built environment is a necessity. Every other industry does it. And frankly, everything that goes into a building is manufactured.
That's right.
But the buildings themselves are not. So I figured something was wrong and several years ago decided we needed to find a way to make this journey to be able to incorporate and utilize industrialized construction to increase the efficiency of creating the built environment.
It's like, it makes so much sense when you sort of explain it, right? And when you take a step back and think about it, whether it's a house or a multi-story building, essentially it's a like ship the manufactured pieces to the site and then like assemble it there, which has its extra layer of complexity. Like you don't even like it when you get your IKEA furniture and you have to put it together. How could you like it more to have to put together a 5-story building yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we came by it honestly. At the end of the day, creating the built environment was originally artisans and craftsmen and technologists, engineers, and we're talking thousands of years ago. And out of that grew, the idea of guild indenture to learn a trade, all of those beautiful things. And we, as a result of that, have organized our built environment construction process, sort of recognizing and giving a shout out to those times. And at the same time, everything behind it has progressed into a manufacturing thing. And that's somehow the built environment itself, as it stands, is the stronghold from that time and space.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just when you talk about artisans, right, it just so connects. I mean, whether it's shoes or shirts or tables, I mean, every single thing sort of went through that process. But you're right, the built environment has sort of been the holdout, the stalwart that says, we will not give into efficiency.
Except the drywall's manufactured, the switchgear's manufactured, the windows are manufactured, the tools that you use to put it together are manufactured. But it's not.
Right. All the different components. Yeah. So listen, I want to go through that. I think certainly I sort of look at myself as related to a lot of the audience of the show who's like probably hasn't even thought about it till I got to it, which is why I think FullStack Modular is such an interesting kind of episode. So I really want to get through how you guys do it and the importance of location and transportation and use case and how people should think about where it can be and the benefits and maybe what some people sort of the fear and uncertainty and doubt some people maybe have in buying a modular building and how that works. So we'll get to all that. But let's sort of start from the beginning. You're part of the founding of the business in 2016, and you've touched on, you said we came to it honestly. So, if you wouldn't mind, let's maybe go with the origin story. Like kind of what's your background? How did you get to this? And what was the aha moment where you were like, all right, let's get this thing, let's do this?
Yeah, I wish I could I could say that I didn't learn anything growing up. I grew up in the construction business and development business, my grandfather actually was involved in a modular company that was a concrete modular company that was one of the three successful respondents to an effort in the 70s called Project Breakthrough, which was to build attainable senior housing. And amazing that we're sort of talking about it again, but they built three companies, Starrett Companies, a local New York company, and then Four City, and their partner in the Midwest, and then one in California. And they built, I think it was 50 or 60,000. There was just a book written about it. There's 50 or 60,000 units that were made out of concrete that were the one that my grandfather was involved in was designed by a brilliant engineer named Tom Dillon, and it was incredibly effective. But there were maximum 8 stories. There were concrete. Unless you want to get really geeky in engineering, we talk about sort of what happened. So it had been.
So it sounds like there was. So it
was very successful. They're still around
specifically for elder housing.
Yeah, exactly.
So the problem is we don't have enough housing for aging population. How can we build something sturdy and relatively fast and predictable? And
it worked. And there
still exists today.
Almost all of them are still in operation.
Okay.
They're but they can only go max 8 stories and it worked. I mean, it was a really smart thing. And then administrations changed and the program died. There was a single source customer, which is a bad idea. So when I started this company, I don't have one single source customer. And so what happened was I was working in New York. I come from the Midwest. I was working in New York. I was working for Four City Ratner Companies, and we had bought a huge piece of property in Brooklyn and committed to 6,500 affordable units. And the interesting thing about construction in New York is that the construction cost of building something is as volatile as the stock market. So like if things get busy, prices go up by triple and then they go down. And I went to the president, to Bruce, and said, look, we need a way, if we're going to build 6,500 affordable units, we need to know what they're going to cost, because otherwise how are we going to ever finance them? Why don't we try something different? And he said, well, what? He says, and he also was familiar because he comes from the same place. Let's try modular. And he's like, well, but nobody's ever really built any tall modular buildings. This is like, okay, but we can. And
it is possible.
We can. There was one, at that point, there was one tall modular building in Wolverhampton that was done as a university experiment that was clumsy at best and is odd, but still exists. And so we went to go see that, and then it was around 2007, 2008. The world fell apart, and the good news is that gave us
stock market volatility.
Exactly. Speaking of stock market volatility, and then so we got the I got the opportunity, and we as a company got the opportunity to do R&D for a bunch of months to try to figure out a way and a system to build high-rise modular buildings.
So just to ask the question, you said there was an experiment, it was a little bit clunky. Does that mean like it looked sort of odd and clunky, or what was sort of, when you say it was clunky, what was clunky
Just look
about
up
it?
modular Wolverhampton, England, and you'll see it. It's like a tower, and it sort of has a concrete core, and the mods are sort of attached to it. It was interesting.
It was a good proof of concept, but
look, what we did, we built the tallest modular building in the world, which is no longer the tallest modular building in the world. And it was also an experiment, right? So
how tall are we talking?
33 stories.
That's significant. That's sizable, yeah.
Yeah, it's 1,100 mods and 363 apartments, and it's downtown Brooklyn, adjacent to the arena. So, it was significant, and it, like any prototypes, it was a prototype, and it had its clunks and bumps and bruises. And at the same time, the concept worked perfectly, and the building is doing great. And as a result of that, I mean, countries launched modular initiatives as a country mandate, as an outgrowth of that effort and some others that had happened in the world. So it was groundbreaking, at least from a process of a new industry.
So why? So it's something I was thinking about. I think there was a time when you could order like a cabin or a house from the Sears
catalog,
right?
Which they say is coming back. I think I read somewhere that Sears is thinking about, or someone has bought the name. There's something going on about that because, by the way, people are thinking about that, right?
Yeah.
You see between conversion vans and like I have a piece of land in the Poconos or you name it. And everybody's trying to think like, how do I utilize this space and not overbuild or overdo or whatever? There's a lot of that going on.
Well, anyone who knows anyone who's built their own house, for example, or has built their own house has experienced a modicum of what you're talking about, which is you started with a plot of land and an idea in your mind of what it was going to take to build it. And then you sat down with someone to get it designed and found out, okay, it's going to be way more than what I thought it was going to be and complicated. Yeah. Then you got started and inevitably ran into cost overruns and change orders and whatnot. Yeah. Then there's delays because product doesn't arrive or the plumber doesn't show up or like, right. So all the issues you talked about, right. I think at a small scale.
Rate of trades, which is one of my friend's favorite terms.
Right. And then people this one's blaming the other one. I got to redo this. My God, how could your electrician run this there? All that stuff. So this isn't the first time, and going back to the Sears catalog, that someone has tried this. And I don't know if you know the answer, but why do you think it wasn't successful in years gone by? Like you talked about this experiment in the 70s, Sears was long before that. Like what caused those to fail? And then corollary to that, what's different today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of answers to that question. So all industries, no matter what they are in some status of and level of maturity, right? Yeah. So startup industries are startup industries, and they're clunky, and there's more failures than there are successes, et cetera. So I think that one of the sort of three pillars of things that are sort of in the modular space that are is that. I think the other thing is that a lot of this stuff flies under the radar. I mean, for instance, panelized modular multifamily buildings are being built all over the country in the thousands by thousands right now.
I'd say, I don't know.
Panelized. So if you build a panel of roof, it could be fully finished panels with siding on the outside and drywall on the inside, or just the wood panels themselves, et cetera. And then you flat pack them and you send them off to build homes like Ryan Homes or Pulte Homes or any of those like Web Homes. They've been doing it forever. They build those all in a factory with just a couple of guys. It's incredibly effective. But then you need all of the trades the way that you described before. But that industry is very mature. Like it's a commodity at this point. Okay. So
just so I can repeat back to you.
Of course.
It's essentially the structure of the building is prefab and gets shipped out, and then it gets assembled on site. Yeah. But what's still needed is the electrical, the plumbing, the internal.
Or some of it is done the same way as you just described, fully distributed, finished, et cetera. But they all still need to be tied together.
Got it.
But that's a much more mature industry and has been around for all those companies that I told you about. Most people know about them, and they've been around 100 years or so.
Okay.
Where we focus in the sort of multifamily space, it's a more complex building. It's more complex MEP systems. It's a more complex structural systems, et cetera. So it takes a lot more planning. And as an industry, oddly, and I don't think so effectively, we have moved away from the way buildings used to be designed by architects and engineers, which was to very finite level of detail, very specific instructions, et cetera. And now developers, because it costs money to hold on to land and opportunity, et cetera, spend less and less money on the design up front. And then they end up with the story that you just said about a house, even though it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reason you have those overruns and delays is that it's not all planned out. What we do forces that discipline, because if you're building it in a factory in components that have to be exactly the same tolerance and exactly precise, or they don't go together, you have to do all that planning. So you asked earlier about why sort of the things. So one of the other reasons that it hasn't caught on is that the industry has moved away from like, let's actually figure out how it's going together. Let's just get a number from a contractor and hope it comes out okay, which is really what the industry has been doing for far too long.
Right.
And now we're trying to move them back towards a disciplined process, which people don't have patience for. So that's the second reason that's it. And then I think one of the other reasons is that in our country, we tend to have nomenclature for things that is inaccurate, right? So, you say, I want a Coke, and everybody, it could be just generally, I want a Kleenex, like you give it your brand name, it has some brand name that carries meaning. Yeah. So modular it's not a misnomer, but it's too broad to be anything. So the things that I just told you about are all sort of a modular approach, right? So you can build modular curtain wall system. They've been around for 30 plus years. You could build modular wall panels, which again has been around for years. You could build a modular structural system where you sort of infill the whole thing. I mean, all those things here, it's modular wall systems, modular shower systems, you name it. They're not all, they all have different business models. They also have different applications. So FullStack, what we do is a fully volumetric modular system where we finish as much as we can in the factory, including putting on the facade, doing all the finishes, putting in the accessories, doing all the mechanical and electrical distribution. So we're really trying to eliminate the majority of the work on site. And there are specific places where there's value to that. And there are specific places where there's less value of it. And a lot of it has to do with labor cost and productivity and availability of things and a whole bunch of other, but that's so the industry is now growing because the needs aren't being met.
Because of the stuff where you started a while ago saying that, and there's no secret to everyone that trades, finding labor is like super challenging.
In any industry.
Well, that's true. Yeah. They're oversubscribed, so you can't get there fast enough. And then to your point, time is money. So if I'm developing a building, until I get this thing up and running and people in it, it's just bleeding. Right. So I need to get it done.
And on top of that, I mean, the needs are like the last estimates I've seen are, the country needs more than 7 million housing units.
And that number is not going down.
And it's not going down, and construction is not coming. It's not even coming close to it. If you do a Venn diagram or a line diagram, the intersection isn't happening anytime that we can imagine. Right. So we need better ways, and there's not one answer, but we need better ways, and this is an answer to a type of system that, if utilized as its manufacturing value creates, can create a lot of housing with less skilled labor and more cost effectively and higher quality, which, like I said, every other, manufacturer. I mean, just imagine if somebody said, look, I'm going to make you a car in my garage and you're going to pay me $90,000 and it's going to be all electric, and just come see me in a couple of weeks and and you could come pick it up. I mean, you would laugh, right? I mean, it's like, you would laugh. And not to say there aren't people that can do that, right? So, but like, that's just absurd, right? It's just like, you can't even say like, I've had people who've launched bakery businesses, right?
Right.
They can't bake out of their house. Like you're not buying their pies as a Michelin star restaurant from somebody's house because, they
got to manage it.
So it is sort of absurd, right? But and how many do you does your neighbor like make your clothes? And
drop right, exactly.
It's all of the rest of it sounds ridiculous, right? But you say, oh no, but we build buildings exactly that way.
Exactly the same way. So when you're in if I was to go to a FullStack modular building, would I know that I was in a building made a different way?
You might, or you might not. It sort of depends on what the architecture and the goal is. But you don't it doesn't. I mean, you'd know something. If you were a craftsman, you'd know that it's plumb and square. Everything is plumb and square.
What plumb and square?
Yeah, meaning that it's perfectly square, perfectly aligned. Everything's one of the values of, say, for instance, the trade of carpentry is that most buildings are built imperfectly and not perfectly straight, or the walls are not perfectly aligned, et cetera. And the magic of a great carpenter is they can make that look exactly as if it were perfect. The difference in a factory is you get to do quality assurance and everything is perfect. Right. So you don't need that level of skill because you're doing it in a perfectly...
All the skill goes into the manufacture of it, but the assembly becomes a much easier, less skill. Yeah,
exactly. So it's really the upfront planning of it, the process of production, and then as a result of that, the amount of skill that's needed to do it is diminished, and the productivity is higher. Because if a carpenter has to figure out how to do a compound miter in a wall that's not straight, it's going to take them time, even if they're
Oh, sure. And then multiply that by 360 apartments,
exactly.
which each apartment has like 15 walls. Like you're just,
I remember sort of early days with very seasoned carpenters that were working in the factory, and they're like, "Oh, I figured out a way that we can make all of these countertops fit if I just shave 1/8 of an inch, off of that thing."
Right.
I'm like, "Wait, why are you shaving 1/8 of an inch off of it?" He's like, "Well, because they're making these walls bow." I said, "Well, then we're going to stop that."
Right, exactly.
Like, so then we stop the line and we go over to there. Like, you guys either are going to make this straight or you have to leave. Because
Right.
And he was dumbfounded by like, "Oh," I said, "because now you have to cut the same thing 150 times.
Right.
That's not okay." Not the way our construction has evolved. And the skills that are required, some of them are to mitigate the imperfection of what we do, instead of embracing a methodology in order to eliminate a lot of that imperfection.
Yeah, just solve it at the manufacturing floor instead of
figure out
solving
what
it
you're
down
doing,
the line.
and then you don't have that problem.
Right.
It's
So-
like countertops. I'm sure if anybody's ever done renovation of anything in their house or built a house, like you got to install the walls, install the cabinets, and then stop,
Right.
and then wait for the guy to come template the countertops, which is probably another 2 weeks, and then you're going to wait another 2 weeks for it to be manufactured. We order it off the plans because if it doesn't fit, somebody's getting fired, right? It's like, and so it's a very different mentality, but it yields high quality.
So is there anything in the way of adoption? In other words, like it just, as we talk about it here, right? Not, it just, the logic of it just seems so, I don't know, indisputable.
Right.
What's preventing more fulsome adoption?
Yeah.
Why would we do it any other way?
A bunch of things. So the stakeholders, there's a bunch of stakeholders, right? So governments are stakeholders, and they have, for the most part, have been open.
Why are they? Maybe back up. What is the government?
Well, because you have to get building permits and all the other things that it changes, and the whole the regulatory side of it. Although every state in the country has a regulatory side to look at modular, and it's actually pretty efficient. The local jurisdictions, the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction, has varied opinions, just like people, right? And so they're either helpful or disruptive, or it all depends on what the goal is. And so that's one of the stakeholders that sort of needs to buy into this in a significant way in order for it to be effective. Then the other stakeholder are the lending institutions, right? The lending institutions have to get comfortable with the fact that this is more manufacturing finance than it is construction finance, because we need to get finance to build the buildings as they're going through the factory. They're inspectable, they're bondable, they're secure, just like every other manufacturing thing.
Yeah.
But for a construction lender, they doesn't compute. It's Will Robinson danger. They don't understand it. It is easy. It's identifiable. I sort of laugh at the whole, if you get to talk to a banker, you're like, okay, you've been doing pencil meetings for construction draws your whole life, and you sit around at a table and everybody tells you that the mechanical work is 26% done. What is a 26% finished mechanical system? And you're going to argue, oh no, I think it's 22. What are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about, and neither do they. You're comfortable that they're moving along well enough. In our case, if the building is 100 mods and one mod is finished, it's 1/100th complete, right? So it's really easy to calculate. So it's not uncomfortable for banks, but
someone's got to sort of get there. It's just like everything else. The momentum's on the side of what is.
There are modular lending institutions now that are sort of specifically focused on it for the reason you've been able to get modular homes financed for a long time, but even buildings now, there's a modular USA debt fund that you could go to for that. So that's one of the other reasons. And then there's developers, and developers come in many different sort of shapes and sizes, right? So the developers who have their own construction company are reticent to adopt this, right? And a lot of them are, and they're very savvy and capable. So although if you built 1,000 units, we could probably build them more efficiently if they're similar. If they're building one-off buildings all over the place and they have their own scrappy crews who are very capable, we're probably not going to be more cost effective. We'll be more time effective. There's no question about it, but we probably won't be as cost effective as those sort of scrappy owned construction company. So it's an industry, and it's 13.5% of the world economy. It's a big beast, and so it's moving. And our relationship. Look, we have a very good relationship with the trades, and we work with them. I mean, we've just moved to Connecticut, but in New York, we were signatories with the building trades, so we had the whole thing figured out, including how the work was going to happen on site, the small percentage of it, et cetera, and how to collaborate.
And there's not conflict there, because I was thinking that sort of when you think about the trades and unions and just in general, it would seem like this would be a antagonistic relationship.
Ours has not been, and I hope and expect to keep it that way. So here's my view, and I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Unions and sort of tradesmen were part of my life, and so it's sort of natural to me. But two things about that. One of them is that the trades, the building trades in Connecticut, or frankly anywhere in the country, and we're talking to people all over the country, own less than 3% of the housing market. So they're not really in this play. So there's an advantage to finding a way to be. And one of the reasons they're not in the market is it's too expensive. You can't build multifamily housing all union, even if you're getting government money, because the costs just don't work. And they know that, and so does everybody else. So to me, this is a place, a sandbox to play in that they don't have a play in. And we in New York and hope in Connecticut to be signatories with the trades here and do exactly what we've done, which we've done since 2012, and collaborate with them. And so that's the reason we have not had. And interestingly enough, there are environments that are very strong universities like Philadelphia, where they're building lots of modular buildings and they're not using union modular companies, and they're still doing the work. So because again, they're getting a piece of an industry that they don't have any of.
Right. So you're really not in conflict.
We're not taking anything from them. We're giving them something.
Yeah,
and so if they could get 30% of 20% of the market, it's triple what they're currently
getting
doing
right now.
So that's part of the reason.
Everybody's out for their own self-interest.
And the reality is that we do some interesting things because of what we do and the kind of training we do and the very scope we do. We generally attract minorities and women. It's pretty, because it's a, come to the same place every day in a protected environment. It's easy to accommodate that process.
Certainly beats being outside swinging a hammer in December.
Some people, not for everybody, but some people, yes. I mean, some people love that, and some people don't. But you can, we've had plenty of people through our factory who've just sort of had 40 something year old trades that have been doing it since they were 19 and are like, I just want to go to the same place every day. It's like, I just don't want to climb steel anymore, et cetera. Or, young people who've decided that, they wanted a vocational training in lieu of some other kinds of education and career. So that's a good option for them because they can, again, safe place to go, same place every day, pretty much a guaranteed paycheck. It feels much more familiar. It feels much more like any other workspace. You go to the same place, the people in your office, right? Right. And we're the same way at the factory. But if you're a construction worker, you're here 1 month and then you're there another month. And then 3 months later, you're here for a year and then you're traveling over there. So there's a little bit more.
So if you like that, then you're not.
It's a little more homey than vagabond. But
it's funny, actually. I didn't actually meant to double check it. I had looked this up a little while ago, but that you're talking about the length of the construction industry. I believe the longest running company in the world is a Japanese construction company, and it's been around like a long time. I meant to look it up this morning to confirm, but it's like a 2,000-year-old business.
You're probably right. Actually, I know a few of them, and they are in the 1,000+ years old.
It's crazy.
And I've talked to a bunch of them. Actually, was educated right after college in business school in Japan, so I met a bunch of them. But they are. They're very focused, and they've been doing this forever, and it is and they've become massive industries.
Yeah. Do you see the What is the sort of the trajectory now? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time now. Sounds like we're, trying to find another renaissance time of kind of making this happen. I mean, what's sort of the view of sort of this industry from your vantage point? I don't have any sense of, are there a lot of companies doing it? Is it growing? Like, where do you see it in the nascency of the industry itself?
It is less nascent. It's a toddler, I would say. If you're going to put a human,
we're walking.
A human metaphor. It's a toddler. We're walking.
Stumbling.
It is growing. The need is, I told you, so unaccomplishable that you need to use all the tools in your toolbox. Construction metaphor, all the tools in your toolbox to make it work. And this is one of them. And it works. And the good news is that it's being shown to work over and over again. But it also requires an industry to shift from this design, bid, build process to a design, manufacture process, which is a shift. But it's happening regardless of whether it's modular or not. It's just happening also slowly. So it needs to come along, as we talked about. All the work has to be done up front, and the only way that happens is if it's designed for manufacture, like design DFMA, they call it. Or people use the word BIM, but it's really designed for manufacture, which can be done in BIM, but it can be done in a bunch of other ways. So that is necessary. So it's more of a shift than just, I like this widget. Oh no, I'm going to use that widget. The process is slow.
So for people that wouldn't even know if they've seen a building that you guys have worked on or something similar, can you paint some pictures of both the use case where you have buildings built and also what you're thinking about for the future, like where someone could put something like this?
Yeah, I mean, our focus is generally urban environment, mid to high rise. We do other
When you say
things.
Mid to high,
stories? 8 stories and up.
Okay.
And the reason is that, you can build wood 5 stories, basically. Regular wood, we can get into sort of all the other nuances going on in the industry, but wood, 5 stories. So if you want to build like a 7-story building, you build 2 stories of concrete, 5 stories of wood, and it's pretty typical. But north of that, you have another slew. You have to build steel or steel and concrete or some combination of that. And in that, we tend to be pretty effective. Our system is designed for specifically those kinds of use cases. And at the same time, sometimes we're very effective at building, lots of 4-story apartments or restaurant mods that are the same in 20 locations. Or for COVID, we built a bunch of intermodal, transportable, narrow, 8 feet wide, so you could put them on a truck, train, boat, medical units that were negative pressure, so you could do moderately acute care, and then move it somewhere else where the next moderately acute care opportunities. So we're responsive to things that work with our system and that our system works for. And there's a whole host of things, but our focus is really on hotels, student housing, and multifamily, affordable, attainable, market rate.
So one of the challenges I would wonder how you kind of overcome is you mentioned the 8 foot wide. I guess one of the challenges that would come to mind is I got to build it somewhere and move it somewhere else.
Yes.
So I'm sort of constrained, it seems to me, what I can design because I got to get it there.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, that's really all about cost, right? So manufacturing a building is cost effective, right? The labor productivity in a factory is better than it is on site. I don't care how good you are. Even people, no question, pay them the same. It's still better.
Right.
It's 7.5 hours of productivity. Nobody on site gets 7.5 hours of productivity. No. It's consistent, no interruptions for wind or snow or rain or, so it is cost effective on the labor side. But when you transport something that's wide load, as you mentioned, there's a cost and a complexity to that. And you really sort of have to weigh all of those against, whatever you're weighing it against. Should I build it or not build it? Conventional versus modular, whatever source there is. It's the funny, interesting thing is it's endless need. Like I just solve it, even if you solve the problem both ways, it's okay. Right. Like it's still, we're still not getting there.
Right.
And so there is this, but the stakeholders sort of all need to get on board, and it is happening. It is happening.
It's moving. That ball's moving down the field. And so your view is that clearly the need is there, and that to solve the problem overall, modular is going to be part of the answer. And putting words in your mouth now, 25 years from now, a much larger percentage of buildings will be manufactured as opposed to on-site built.
Yeah, I'd say a significant amount. I don't know how much. I can't even sort of predict that, but I said a significant amount. And look, we're here in the United States where we have capacity and materials and supplies and all those things. Like there are dozens of countries that don't have labor, materials, supplies. There are Caribbean countries. They all have the same problem.
Right.
So yeah, it has to get, I get a call about twice a day for, would you open up a factory here in X? And if I make the list, I wanted to get a map and start like plotting it, because I get a call from a different country on a different continent every day of the week. And the reason is the need is there. So and they can't solve it, because if they could solve it with what they had, they wouldn't be calling me.
Right.
Like it was like, could you ship a hotel to New Zealand? I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Like there's construction companies in Australia and New Zealand. Like, what do you like? Or like we need lots of cheap labor. We need factories in the Caribbean. I'm like, yeah, okay, but how are you getting all the materials there? Or, Saudi Arabia, where they're like, oh, we want to build most everything, we want to build industry within the country, which is a fantastic idea. But their housing needs are, it's 600, I think it was last I saw was 600 million square feet of construction. Like you don't have supply to meet that need. So what are you going to do to fix the problem? So like there's whole infrastructure of process that all these places need, and building something elsewhere and exporting it, which is an interesting idea to begin with, because we really have never done that, is one interesting thing, but also building up the systems that you need in order to be able to manufacture in a specific location is a colossal task, but also a potential value proposition. And it's they see the value proposition, they don't see the colossal task. Well, it's normally like, can't I have it tomorrow?
That's pretty much everything everywhere.
Like everything's like, can we open a factory in 6 months? I'm like, okay, maybe you can open a factory in 6 months, but you're not going to be able to have any workers there, and you're not going to be able to get the materials you need, and you're not going to be able to store anything, and you're not going to really. But sure,
anything can happen.
You could have a big open space with lots of really expensitive machinery.
As you pivoted from your construction background into manufacturing, bunch of challenges that you didn't anticipate, right? Because it isn't the same. It isn't the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. It is. First of all, I smile every time I walk into the factory, even if it's not going the way I want it to that day, which still happens in modular manufacturing. It's just organized and it's logical and it makes sense, and all the things that you talked about and everybody's sort of experiences is diminished by the embracing industrialization, right? So. But the challenges are manifold, right? So the interesting thing about the built environment is that it is not an industrialized. It's an industrialized part of the economy. So the suppliers, unlike cars or telephones, et cetera, they don't understand what it means to supply somebody the way that a manufacturer needs to be supplied, relatively just in time, proximate location, timely delivery, all those things. They don't, it's just construction. It's like, you're building a house, but like if you want Windows, it's like 2 years. So like so they don't understand that yet, and they're just starting. So that has to evolve. So that's frustrating. And then of course, in a factory, we have to buy everything, right? Which is interesting because I think about made in America, right? If you want to make something in America, a whole building, the only way to do it today really is do it modularly, because we're buying everything. Right. So we've talked to the Department of Transportation. They have a bunch of interesting DOT funding, but it has this Build America requirement. Right. Well, modularly, it's not easy, but it's totally possible. If you go to a construction manager like Whiting Turner, who's fantastic, you know, or Turner, or does, and say, okay, we're going to build them. They're like, they're going to throw up their hands. They're like, I can't do that. I don't even know how to do it. It's like, I got to go find an electrician that's going to do that. And I got to find an MEP guy that's going to do that. And then my concrete guy's got to figure out where he's buying his fly ash. I was like, I can't do that. Like, they cannot do that. Whereas we can, because we're buying all that stuff and we can source it. You know, it's also valuable for sustainability. We know, we can do all that traceability in a factory.
So are you spending time sort of learning about, lean manufacturing and like managing inventory properly and like storage and, all that stuff? I mean,
all of it.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a little while now, but yes, but it's educating others to be able to do it. It's more of like, I really want to buy these, plumbing fixtures from you, but you have to understand that you have to send it to me in 15 shipments on these dates. I'm giving you our construction schedule, and they have to be labeled this way. And they're like, what? Like, I'm just sending you studs. I mean, so we're having a really interesting conversation right now with one of the big, steel stud manufacturers. I'm like, why can't we send you our machine drawings? Because they exist now,
right.
And I'll send them to you, and you can just package these up for me, and I'll pay you more than, like, significantly more than your middleman is paying you for doing this. But then I don't have to waste all that stuff. I don't have to waste all that time. I mean, like, it's worth something to me. And they're finally like, oh yeah, we understand that. Like, they're getting there. So
education process. I mean,
so
we talked about the financing, the suppliers, the buyers, the users.
Of course. So
it's that nascent industry challenge.
The industry. So the challenge is mostly, after we sort of talked about the users, are about how is the industry going to evolve into something that is industrialized.
That sounds great. And then I know we're kind of wrapping up on time, but just, like I asked you this before, I just wanted to confirm it. Like, one of the things I think people tend to like pride themselves on is like, well, this building got designed, it's architected, people are going to enjoy it a lot more. And I can imagine a stigma, maybe this is just myself, but probably other people who feel like, oh, well, if I go modular, it's just going to be like this like square box and everything looks the same as everything else. Yeah. Is that a misunderstanding of the
total
reality?
Misunderstanding? And it's sort of old nomenclature, right? Mm-hmm. So, modular is a boxy, et cetera. Like, I mean, look, we have a system and a process, as does every building, by the way. Sure. There are amazing developers here, and they're fantastic architects, a lot of whom I've met already, and I'm looking forward to meeting the rest. And our system allows for architectural agency. We just ask them to embrace our system in that agency. So, just like you have to meet the structural requirements and embrace gravity, you have to embrace our system, and then you can do pretty much what you want to do. And that's been our experience, but also what we, since I spent a lot of my life as a developer, as a contractor, like, there's a need to have that, right? You don't. At the same time, we need so much housing, and I don't know, we don't.
Nice to be in a high demand span.
I think, the idea of sort of designing an idea without thinking about how it's actually going to be created, in my opinion, is a miss, right? The design build process is, as an industry, a miss. It's inefficient. It's inappropriate. Like, at the end of the day, why waste money and time on something you're not going to do, right? Because that's R&D, okay, but it's not R&D because we know how to build buildings, right? Right. But it looks like R&D, and it doesn't actually act like R&D, right? There's no. So you really need to embrace the idea that, like, we have a need, we can spend this much money, we can spend this much time, and it has to look great and appropriate. That's easy to solve using our system with good architects and smart developers.
And as the business and the industry continue to take off, is your vision to be like, hey, we've got a facility in Connecticut, we got a facility in Oregon, and then, like, if we wanted to serve other places, we would open more factories so you could build it closer? Is that sort of the longer term vision?
Yeah. The long-term vision, so whether that's 5 years or 8 years, the long-term vision is for us to be able to support factories by doing the design for manufacture and operational intelligence related to building things. Because operating the factory itself is not that complicated. It's all the stuff that I just spoke about. And that's where that's where the rubber hits the road. So I would much rather be able to have somebody call me from Lagos and say, I want to open a factory and I have the money to do it, and be like, fine, here, we'll provide you these services.
Almost like a franchise type of thing.
Yeah, almost like a franchise. And to me, that's where I think it's going. I mean, I might change my mind, but I that's where I think it's going, because I really think the need is that big. And I don't think I'm going to be, we will probably be a multinational company, but I don't think we're going to be,
1,000 locations.
1,000 locations worldwide.
Right.
But I would love it if there were 1,000 locations that could utilize the methodology in order to create, to solve.
And you solve the bigger challenge, which is supply chain.
Exactly.
And like all the logistics
all those
and all
things.
that stuff.
Talk to India all the time, right? Like, it's to be the biggest economy in the world. The population is exploding beyond even our wildest imaginations. The housing is non-existent, and like, they've got a problem. And their labor cost is low. They build buildings for like $28 a square foot, including labor. I mean, it's just crazy numbers. I mean, it makes my head spin a little bit. And they're good buildings. Like, they build some good buildings. And so, you need to figure out how to embrace the right technology and industry in order to solve that housing need. And so it's, the parameters are different, right? But I would love the ability, because our system is adaptable, I would love the ability to create the resources for them to be able to prop themselves up into it.
Well, Roger, I look forward to tracking it. I'm going to give us some wrap-up questions, and we'll close it out. So the question I like to ask is, if you had to do something other than be the president of FullStack Modular, and it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you spend your time doing?
My family, and anybody who knows me well knows this, is that we would have a family in, somewhere in wine country, and we would operate the restaurant.
Like a B&B type.
Like a B&B, mountain biking, very passionate about cooking, and et cetera. So that's probably what I would be doing.
Do you have a favorite business book?
Oh man, I love, because of where I've been for most of the last 10 years. Shoe Dog is is out of control book for me. I think about it every time I don't want to wake up in the morning. I was like, think about, look what he did, and he was way worse off than I was many times. So
Shoe Dog,
yeah,
love it. What's something that you learned early in your life or early in your career, Roger, that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
I don't know if I learned it by mistake. I mean, tenacity, to me, tenacity and grit. I have to tell you, the older I get, the more I recognize, like, tenacity is incredibly important. Also, not being pigheaded and being able to listen, also the other side of that coin. But it just doesn't always work the way you want it to, and you have to be willing to. What does the old song go? Pick yourself up, brush yourself off, and start all over again. I think that's hugely important.
Amen to that. And what's something, Roger, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you go back and tell young Roger and he'd listen to you, think it'd make a real positive impact on his life?
I think the other side of that coin, I think learning how to be open to listening in a more concerted fashion was something that young Roger probably wasn't as good at as he is today.
The old 2 ears, one mouth using proportion situation.
Exactly.
Many of us probably couldn't lose that
100%. But look, it's the fact is I've learned it, and I'm still here. So.
That's the most important thing. Roger, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. I learned a ton. I think it's going to be super interesting, and I look forward to watching FullStack Modular take the world by storm.
Thank you, Ari. I appreciate it.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.